Anna and Walter are young, single, and in love. They've got good jobs, fabulous futures, a magnificent new home that they bought for a song. Who says they can't have it all?
All right, owning a home feels a lot less like the American dream these days and a bit more like the American nightmare. So much so, folks simply, if they can avoid it, aren't buying. Data out today showing the number of new mortgages issued in 2010 was down 12% from the previous year. The only year that number was lower than the one I just quoted was in 2008 during the financial crisis. Not only are we seeing a decline in buying, but also we're seeing an increase in homeowner stress. 38% of households with a mortgage are now spending a whopping 1/3 of their income on home-related costs, all of which may suggest that the president was right.
We've got to strike a balance. Frankly, there's some folks who are probably better off renting.
Well, our next guest agrees, saying renting could be the answer for millions of Americans and that home ownership, unless you have a very specific set of expectations and demands, is overrated. Joining us now, our specialist, Richard Florida. He's senior editor at The Atlantic and professor at the University of Toronto and has a fan base around the mega panel today, Richard, so be warned, they're coming for you. People always say, you say, should I rent or buy? And the answer always is, well, some people should rent and some people should buy, and you get these vagaries. Are there any rules? What is the argument for why anybody should buy anything or rent anything? What's the foundation of the very argument that you're making?
Well, I think it's all changed. You know, people used to say if you buy a house, you can save money, it's going to go up, and, you know, it'll be sort of forced savings, you'll have a place to live, and you'll put money in the bank, which is your house. But as we've seen, that isn't true. And I think what's happening is that more and more people who can buy a house are choosing to rent, especially if they think they might have to change their job. And two, and I think quite tragically, many people who might like to buy can't rent because you guys were just talking about it. The banks are not lending. And I think one of the reasons those mortgage figures are down is because most people, even with good credit, can't get a loan.
So, Richard, one of the things that people have always said was a strength of the U.S. economy was the flexibility and the mobility of American workers. Americans have always been more willing than Europeans to move wherever the job is. Is the housing market changing that now?
Well, I think it has. And, you know, there's some debate on this amongst economists trying to figure it out. But, you know, I think you can divide Americans by income, you can divide them by education, but you can also divide them by the mobile and the stuck. And people who are stuck with an underwater house, whether it's in Detroit or Phoenix or Las Vegas or wherever, and they can't move to where the new jobs are, they are really badly behind the eight ball. And I think that's why so many people now are saying, I'd rather rent. Until this economy gets sorted out, I may have to move and uproot my family to get work, and I can't be tied to a house if I can't sell it. Everything's great in the boom, but when things go bust, boy, it gets complicated.
Go ahead, Ari.
Richard, this is Ari Melber with The Nation. I live on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and I feel stuck and mobile at the same time. It's a real mess. So I don't even want to start with you on that. I don't even want to go there. What I want to ask is, in the book, The Creative Class, you, of course, talk a lot about how the first waves of people that move into certain neighborhoods can change the whole neighborhood. Everyone knows about that in a racial sense, but you talk about it in a lot of other demographic groups. With what you're arguing today, does any of that change? Does it matter whether, for example, you talk about creative communities and certain times artists and the gay community and different racially mixed communities coming together and changing an entire neighborhood in a relatively short amount of time without a government intervention? Does that matter much, whether those people that you write about are renting or buying?
No, and I think the real interesting thing, going back to your guys' previous conversation, is the United States is becoming more unequal by income and education, but it's also tragically becoming more unequal by where you live. And, of course, people will make that migration into the East Village or the West Village or over to Brooklyn or where my brother lives in Hoboken, and they'll rent or do whatever they have to do. But people who live on the East Coast and in big cities, New York, Boston, Washington, Chicago, San Francisco, they have advantages and opportunities that others do not. So I think one of the things, and the other thing that Christia has written about so eloquently, is the movement of global migrants into big cities in the United States and across the world, changing the economy and demography so radically, and partly that was behind the London riot. So I think part of the economic divide we see in America is renter, owner, and where you live, and that's just overlaid on the great divide of income and education
which
that we see.
Yeah, which becomes basically the amplification of America as a class split society. We're talking about class divisions ultimately here, Crystal.
Right, right. And Richard, I had a question related to that. We have an idea in the country that America sort of leads the world in terms of home ownership, but if you actually look at rates of international home ownership, we're kind of in the middle of the pack. So I'm wondering, despite all of our federal government support for home ownership, how much has that actually changed the percentage of people who own homes?
Not much. I think at our high, we never quite hit 70, and in a bunch of countries, including Canada, which we're deeply familiar with, it's 70 plus. I think in the United States now, what's really interesting, and I think this bodes well for the United States, although it's quite troubled in the short run, the United States is now sorting this out in a way that's very interesting. And my hunch, the Urban Land Institute, who tracks this, believes that if you really look at the real rate of home ownership today, like people who own their homes, those who are underwater, it's less than 60%. And they believe it could fall to about 55%. And in my work, I find that when you get home ownership rates in regions of about 50 to 55%, you get a lot of dynamism and flexibility. So we're not talking about home ownership going to zero. I think we're talking about it going from about 65 down to 55%. And that seems to create enough balance between homeowners and renters to make your economy more flexible, as Chris was saying, more mobile and more resilient.
And we will leave on that optimistic note from Mr. Florida. Thank you, sir, and thanks to our mega panel as well. Wonderful to see you guys, and it was fun to have a Richard Florida fan club at the table, as I myself consider myself a member of that club, and it was like we met. Yeah.
There you go. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a good weekend, you guys. I'll see you for dinner, right? We're gonna
apple pie also.
Okay, good.